100 years ago this month, 3 young girls died in an upstairs bedroom room of my house, which I use as an office. They had contracted the Spanish flu, also known as the Black Plague, in the year 1918, and they clung to life for another year, but it wasn't the Black Plague that claimed their lives. Over the course of the last 3 years, certain entities have told me this story. It's believed among Tibetan monks that if you are in tune spiritually with the universe, and that if you are powerful enough mentally, you can summon up physical entities. One of the 3 girls that passed away in the bedroom of my house, which is 116 years old, had such powers. There are various names for it across the various religious schools of thought. In pop culture, it's been called The Shining, made famous by author Stephen King. But according to the story that the entities have told me, the youngest of these 3 girls had this gift. Back in those days, one of the most common practices for folks who had contracted the Black Flu, or the Black Plague rather, the Spanish flu, which killed over 500,000 Americans alone, killed people around the world. Because during World War I, and people were going all over the planet fighting the cause, and as a result, this allowed the plague to spread worldwide. By the way, they finally determined that it had originated at an army base in Kansas. It was a form of swine flu, some infected pigs. And the American soldiers contracted it there and then just took it around the world. But the people at the time didn't know how to combat this plague. So basically, if you got it, you were quarantined. You were shut up in your house. You were shut up in your room. Anybody that lived with you had the misfortune of being shut up with you. And usually they would contract the Spanish flu and they would succumb to it as well. They had individuals called plague doctors at the time that would wear masks. They've been made more famous in pop culture here in recent years due to their creepiness. They're in a lot of video games. They have like their masks. They wore masks just like a solid black mask with like a long black beak. Most of them were not doctors. Most of them did not even practice medicine. And most of them, when they went to the homes of people who were quarantined with the Spanish flu, the Black Plague, they did no medical treatment whatsoever. At most, they were census takers. They were trying to keep records of how many people had contracted the plague, how many people had died from the plague, and if anybody showed any hopes, any signs of recovering from the plague. Most of the plague doctors themselves would contract the plague, and they would die as well. One such plague doctor was making his way through the region, and he called upon the 3 girls. By this time, they were the only ones in their family left alive. Unfortunately, their parents had also contracted the plague. They had died, and the girls had shut themselves up into this bedroom in the upstairs of my house. A series of seemingly plague-related yet unexplained deaths seem to be following this particular plague doctor around Central Virginia, Southern Virginia, down into Tennessee, where it was later discovered he was originally from. Sure, he left a trail of death in his wake, and sure, all these folks, mostly children, had contracted the Black Plague. But what was so suspicious was that these children were dying of strangulation. There were a couple young adults also, young women. And it turns out that this plague doctor was not part of the census takers. He was not in the medical profession, as most plague doctors weren't. He was a chair repairman. You see, back in those days, they made things to last. Most chairs that people had in their homes were made out of solid oak. A lot of times they had some sort of grapevine webbing as their seat or as their backs. They were made out of hickory. They were made out of black walnut, black cherry. And when one broke, you didn't just throw it out and replace it. You repaired it. Because those chairs, like most things made back then, like my house, which is 116 years old, and which I'm sure will be here another 116 years from now, while many of the homes built in the last quarter of a century will probably long have fallen down by then, these chairs lasted. Everything lasted. They were made with good quality products. They were made with good workmanship. So this chair repairman, what he was doing is he was taking advantage of sick people during one of the most horrendous plagues in human history, and he was making his old chair rounds, going to homes where he was known. This is how he gained entry into so many homes. Knock, knock. Hey, remember me, the chair repair guy? Now I'm here to help as a plague doctor. Oh, you're home alone? Everyone is dead but you? How convenient for him, he thought. And how easily and how excited he was to help them join their dead loved ones. And he did. They never confirmed the numbers this chair repairman took of children and young women during the Black Plague. They said it was in the dozens, perhaps in the scores. But his last victims were taken on this property, if it weren't dark right now, within sight. And these small bodies are buried about 100 yards behind me. Ironically, where if you put your earbuds in right now, you can hear the leaves rustling in the forest. If there is any good news to such a horrid story, it would be that upon autopsying the bodies, it was found that this sicko hadn't taken any indecent liberties with any of his victims. He just killed them. He was a serial killer. He saw an opportunity, and due to the markings on their necks, the bruising, it was determined that he strangled most of his victims with his bare hands. And this is where the story takes quite a turn for the even more weird. You see, serial killers are human. Murderers, that's scary enough. But when one of their victims possesses a power that can't be measured by human terms, things take quite a turn for the creepy. As the chair repairman, cleverly disguised as a plague doctor, was doing what he did, the youngest of these three girls summoned her powers. Tulpa, it's known by the Buddhist monks. Tulpa, T-U-L-P-A, or the Shining, according to Stephen King. The ability to use your spirituality or your mental abilities to summons a physical manifestation. This girl used her tulpa. She used her shining to call out into the night. A night that was 100 years ago, perhaps from this very night. And a physical manifestation came raging through the forest. Came from the direction right up there where they're buried now. The ground shook as it pounded with unhuman sprints. Bam, 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 running to the house, running to the girl who had summoned this beast through her tulpa, through her shining, running to help her. Getting there, ripping the front door off of the house, clambering up the stairs, only to find that he was only minutes too late. However, the sinister plague doctor was still there, looking over his victims as if they were trophies won in a sporting event. Little did he know, his head would be the next to be mounted. Or at least it would have been if they'd ever been able to find it. They say his head was snapped clean off of his shoulders, right off his neck, as if something massive, huge, and strong just took it and twisted it like a pop top on a soda bottle. They found the body, never the head, and the neck had a clump of brown, unidentifiable hair. For as the last remaining life bled out of the little girl that laid on the floor, so did the tulpa, so did the shining. But her remaining existence lingered just long enough to allow the beast that she had called from another dimension to do his job, to do his bidding, and end the dirty work of the chair repairman, the artificial plague doctor. People continued to die from the Black Plague, the Spanish flu, but nobody else died at the hands of the sicko chair repairman from Tennessee. He had met the end of his route. He'd come to the end of the line. Never underestimate the power of your tulpa.